Okay, so again, welcome everyone to our August webinar. Today we have Becky and Sean from Cycle Oregon here to talk about the adaptive bike guide that they have put together. So our agenda today is going to be going over the adaptive bike guide that they've put together. They're going to be talking about common disabilities and adaptive strategies for them, as well as the equipment and the uses of the equipment that they have. We'll have some Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat or just save it till the end and we'll have some time to talk about it. And then we'll have some statewide announcements there at the very end too. Um, so um, Many of you know Becky and Sean. They are very active members in our Safe Routes community. But they are the program manager and program coordinator for Cycle Oregon. And here are two really cute pictures of them with a bunch of kiddos biking around. So with that, I will turn it over to them to start talking about the adaptive bike guide.
Hey y'all, thanks for being here. Yeah, so we created this guide and we also added equipment this year that is available to loan to programs around the state. I'm gonna kind of just like go over the basics of what's in the guide. And then Sean is going to give us some kind of go through the equipment more specifically and let you know what we have and kind of like who it can be used for. And yeah. So first of all, what is adaptive cycling? It's a very broad term. I tend to think about this in just in terms of like, regardless of ability, all your students deserve the opportunity to participate with their peers in some capacity, to get outside if you're going outside, and to feel the wind on their faces. So at minimum, like even if they're not able to pedal, even if they're just more of a passenger, if you can get all of your kiddos participating in your bicycle safety unit in some way, that's going to be meaningful for them. And that's really important. So that's what we should be striving for. But there's a lot of different ways to include kids with disabilities. Can I control this, Indigo, or are you switching slides?
I'm going to be switching sides.
Okay, go to the next one. Thank you. So some mindsets to take into your programming is that every person and disability is unique. It's sometimes not adequate just to say like, this person has Down syndrome. Like there's so many ways that that disability can present itself. And so we're still just keep in mind, we're talking about individuals, and it will really serve you and your program to learn as much as you can about your kiddos going into this to set them up for success. Ask questions rather than making assumptions. I tend to just say like, well, things like what is this kid, what can they do, or what do they like? And sometimes that can be really helpful to just objectively explain what the student is like. They're nonverbal, they use a walker to get around. Like just some really basic ability type things will help you determine what type of equipment they can use and to what extent they can participate in the programming. Also just keeping in mind the differentiation in instruction, like we hope you're doing that anyway. It's just best practice for teaching. It's going to help serve all of your students when you are presenting things with both by demonstrating, by verbally, by using posters and graphics. The more different ways that you can present information, it's really going to help your kids in many cases with disabilities, but it's also going to help all of your students, including especially your English language learners, for example, as long as they're getting multiple modes, is going to be really helpful. So just keep in mind, so a lot of these practices can be used across the board, regardless of who is in your classes. And then importantly, do not expect too little of your student just because they've been maybe labeled with a disability. Again, get to know them, but see what's a reasonable challenge to bring to them, and don't necessarily set the bar low just because they've been labeled as having a disability. They can often do a lot. Go to the next slide. What is the adaptive guide? So this is intended to be a companion to the curricula that we already have, the Jumpstart curricula. So we have our Jumpstart bicycle and pedestrian safety education. This is a companion to the bike part. And part of the guide actually goes through each lesson and drill guide and has some tips in there for how you can modify them to include more students. It's also, there's just like an overview. In some cases, it might take the lesson and just add some more strategies in there for meeting students with different needs. And there's just an overall kind of like basic adaptive knowledge. It felt really kind of impossible to me when I started working on this guide to say like, hey, just write a guide for like disability and biking. Like it's just such a vast world, and I don't purport to like know everything or put everything in here. So just keep that in mind. But I really hope that it is a starting place for making your programming as inclusive as possible, and just kind of giving you some basic strategies that you can run with and some resources that you can dive into. For example, if you have some students who are vision impaired, like there's some resources for you to really kind of dive in and find some more ways of serving them. When we started writing this guide, we reached out to, we have a couple adaptive PE specialists who helped write it. We also have some like ABA therapists, and as well as some other PE teachers and people with lived experience living with disability as who contributed to writing the guide. So I felt like we got a really nice, well-rounded picture and lots of good advice from people who know a lot more about this than I do. Next slide. As you're getting started, and since we're going into the start of the school year, this is a great time to start thinking about this. So first of all, you definitely want to find out who and reach out to those specialists in your region and in your school districts. They are very busy people. They're often, there might be one person for a whole big district who does adaptive PE, for example. And they can be spread very thin. So reach out to them, let them know who you are and what you're doing, and say like, hey, I'm going to be doing bike safety at this school. What students do you know, or you might have already identified them. Can you be there to assist with this, or what do you know about this kid? And just kind of like make contact with those experts, because they're already there. They probably have a relationship with those kiddos and the other teachers, and they can be a really wonderful resource. In some cases, I'm always surprised to find quite a few schools have some therapeutic, like at least one therapeutic trike. It's often in the ESD, the Education Service District. And a lot of teachers don't know it's there, and a lot of coordinators don't know it's there, but like most districts will have a therapeutic trike. So that's just one resource that's out there. Contact your ESDs to see if they have equipment that you can use and folks who know how to use it. Like I said, you also want to gather information about your students. Depending on who your employer is, and if you're not directly employed by the district and involved in the instruction, you likely will not see their IEP, their individual education plan, if there is one. But just, again, getting to know those PE teachers and say like, hey, what kids might need more support. In some cases, there are entire classes that are adaptive or that have like a set group of kids with intellectual disabilities in one class. And in some cases, those individual students are in the mainstream PE class. So you'll just want to find out what that structure is like, and then just start getting to know what that kid's schedule is like and what their needs are. Then you want to select equipment. Like I said, that could be borrowing something from the district or a local partner. We at Cycle Oregon just built an adaptive fleet in the last year that has all the way down to little kid bike sizes and all sorts of different configurations. And Sean will tell you a little more about those specific bits of equipment later. But you want to just be thinking about, okay, what can this kid do? What do they need? And then we can help you come up with a piece of equipment that might serve them if needed. And then plan your lessons. You might need to just go through, if you're using hour lessons or a drill guide, and identify places where, okay, I have a tricycle in this class. Maybe you need to set up your drills to make them, the pathways wider or something like that in order to accommodate a trike. So you might need to adjust your lessons a little bit. And then set meaningful goals and measure progress. Keep in mind that means different things based on who you're working with. In some cases, it might be a very meaningful goal that you just got a student to keep their helmet on for the duration of class. That can be a huge challenge and a huge success if you're able to get there. So just kind of measuring that progress can help you and the student feel successful. Next slide. Just a note on the language. Language around identity and especially disability is always changing. I was out of the classroom. I used to be a classroom teacher and I was out of schools for like 10 years before I came back into this role. And I found that sometimes my language around describing kids and learning disabilities was really outdated. And so I had to kind of like update that. And but mainly what I leaned on was just like making sure that I'm using the language that that the schools or the individual are using. So again, that just goes back to like asking questions, lean on that preferred language. So if a student, I hear a lot of people now using terms like, you know, neurospicy to describe like different forms of neurodivergence or autism, which is like, it's just great. Like let people describe themselves and tell you more about themselves rather than trying to put language on them. So just keep that in mind. The language that's used in the guide, I tried to just stick with what the educators and the other folks who are contributing to the writing used. I hear some folks say like, no, we don't use the term special ed, and there are tons of schools that still use that term. And that's how they identify the teachers and the classes. So I'm not trying to be offensive by saying special ed. I just like want to acknowledge that that is used in many places and some folks may not be comfortable with that. So just trying to stick with what whoever you're working with and find what works for them. And we already talked a little bit about this, but just be objective in describing what that student needs or what their abilities are. That's going to help you come to serve them the best. The word disability is a legally identifying term. You have to, you know, jump through some red tape in order to get identified as having a disability, and that in many cases opens you up to different services. If you're a student, that would be different educational services in that program. So we're going to use that, but we're also going to talk about some things that aren't legally disabilities, but that still can feel disabling. Or that might require special services or special support or attention. Anyone who has worked with kiddos knows that like there are tons of kids in the mainstream classroom who might be undiagnosed, might have really mild forms of neurodivergence or autism, for example. And they maybe don't have a diagnosis or any like legal definition, but we know they might need some additional support in different ways. So those kiddos, we're hoping the strategies in here will serve them as well, even though they're not technically disabled. Next slide. This one has some like clicky pop-ups, Indigo, just so you know. Just some basics of adaptive equipment so you know what I'm talking about. So the photo there is with Sean and his daughter riding one of our tandem bikes. So a tandem is just one or more rider on the same piece of equipment. Next. We're talking about the tandem. Oh, you can click again, Indigo. There's a captain position, and the captain is the person who is usually steering and more in control of the bike. And on this one, Sean's the captain, he's in front, but I'll show you later, there are some tandems where the captain is in the back, but generally it's just it would be like the instructor. It's the stronger rider. It's usually the taller or bigger rider who's more in control of like steering and braking. And in this case, Eliza on the back is the stoker because she's pedaling. There are some tandems where the other rider doesn't have to contribute to pedaling, in which case I would just call them the passenger. Next. A recumbent, you've probably seen these around. There are so many different configurations, but the idea is just that it gets the rider lower to the ground and in a more reclined position. That might be due to a disability. It might just be more comfortable or more stable for the rider. There's a lot of different ways to set up a recumbent. Next. And then you'll also hear us say trike or tricycle. That just means 3 wheels. And again, that can be set up in many different configurations. Sometimes even you'll see 2 wheels in the front and 1 in the back. Next. And then finally, this is just one example of these words don't have to exist on their own. You can have a trike, you can have a tandem that's also a tricycle. You can have a recumbent that's a tricycle. You can have a recumbent tandem. Wild, right? So just giving you some examples of some of the equipment that we have in our fleet. That one in the bottom right is super cool. In that case, the captain is the mom, she's in the back, and then her son is riding in the front and he can pedal or not. So he's more of a stoker or a passenger, and that's not only a tandem, but it's also a trike. Okay, next. Okay, so some basics continued. I mentioned this before, just to ensure that when you're setting up your lessons, if you are using some adaptive equipment, that you have taken that into consideration. So I always say, try it out. We've been bringing some of our adaptive equipment when we do bike rodeos and stuff like that. And even if someone with a disability isn't the one riding them, people are always curious and they love to get out and try them and see what they're like. And I think it's such a valuable experience for people who can ride a typical 2-wheeled bike to feel what it's like to manipulate a trike through curbs. I was telling Sean this, but I just recently got a big cargo bike, like a Bachbeat style. And it's made me, I ride it around a lot in the city, and it's made me realize how often the bike infrastructure is not able to accommodate bigger equipment. And it's not an adaptive bike that I'm riding, but it is like big and wide and heavy like that. And I can't maneuver it through like some narrow bike lanes, through some like crossings that are intended for bicycles. And it just made me so much more aware that folks who maybe are on a trike or a recumbent and are trying to get around and use infrastructure, our infrastructure is often not built to accommodate them. So it just made me more aware of yet another instance where people with disabilities are not being served. So anyway, that's a long way of just saying, definitely get in equipment whenever you can and give it a try. It's going to give you a really valuable perspective on what the user is feeling. And as I mentioned before, adaptive equipment is often longer or wider. It might be hard to fit through like a doorway or through how you've got your cones set up if you have a riding course. So just make sure you try it out and see if the equipment can fit through there and that there's enough room for a trike to like make those curves and stuff like that. Okay, next. I mentioned earlier things that are not disabilities, but that can feel disabling. And when I was working on this guide, I was looking at the other guides that are out there for adaptive bike safety. And one or more of them included obesity, which is not a disability, but is worth mentioning. And I was trying to figure out whether or not that should be included in this guide, and if so, in what capacity. And so I reached out to someone I know who is actually a scholar on fatness, and she provided me this quote. Her name is Rachel Fox, and she said, "A world that," I was like, how do we navigate this? Like, there need to be some considerations for people who are fat, but also like, I don't want to pathologize fatness by saying, you know, this is just disability when it's not. And so she gave me this quote: "A world that is designed for thin people can be disabling to fat people." Can you click again? There you go. So what that means is that, for example, most equipment, and that includes cycling equipment, but also like furniture, transit, airplanes, like all of these things are designed for thin people. And navigating through that environment can be dangerous. It can be very uncomfortable and in general just cause a lot of anxiety for fat people. So just something to keep in mind. We know that typical bike equipment is not going to meet the needs of some of your bigger bodied folks. So I just put together a couple resources and making them feel more included. So a couple of mindsets to mention, a couple of ways of thinking. The term obesity I mentioned, that is generally out of favor with people who are fat. It is considered stigmatizing. It instantly makes us think that someone who's fat is diseased or has health issues that they may or may not have. In many cases, I was asked to use the term fat or fatness. But again, stick with the preferred language. I don't know, your little kids may or may not be like, I'm fat, you can call me fat, So again, just see how people would prefer to refer to themselves and use that language. But typically, obesity is not the word that we want to be using. I would recommend familiarizing yourself with the Healthy at Every Size framework, or HAES. I've included a link at the end slide, which is just a framework for considering that folks can be healthy and strong at any size and at any body weights. And it's a way to think about, again, intervening and considering all the ways that fat people face oppression just going through their everyday lives. PE class, schools, any system, but definitely some of the systems that we work in can be very scary and harmful for folks who are fat. And then just keeping in mind overall that body size is not an indication of overall health or ability. There are plenty of people who are big and fat and tall and are plenty strong and healthy and can do amazing things with their bodies. So just sort of ingraining that in our brains. Next. Some general tips for inclusion with your bicycle safety. I hadn't thought of this, and it was a great recommendation, which was to reference the weight limits for equipment. I had folks say to me who are fat, like, oh my God, every time I have to, like, I'm invited to sit in a chair or get on a bicycle or whatever, I'm constantly thinking, is that going to break or is it safe and can it hold my weight? And so Sean and I went through as best as we could and looked up the weight limits that were provided by the manufacturer for all the bikes that are in our fleet. So in the adaptive guide, there's a chart at the end that you can go to, and it'll tell you, if you're riding the 26-inch Cleary, what is the weight limit for that piece of equipment? Things that can make riding more comfortable for fat people or heavy people would be wider tires. That's just going to give you some more cushion. You might need to increase your air pressure a little bit for a very heavy rider. Wider seats. We added a couple wide seats to our fleet. It's pretty simple to swap those out. So that's something we can do on request now. And then in some cases, trikes or recumbents might be the best solution. Those tend to have, for a very heavy rider, those tend to have higher weight capacities and will just be more comfortable for some riders. You'll also want to lean on a steel bike that's just gonna have a higher weight limit and carry more weight better than, say, an aluminum bike. And just as a baseline, all of our bikes that are in the Jumpstart fleet, for the most part, are steel and have pretty wide tires on them already, and have pretty high weight limits even for kid bikes. So just as basics. Okay, I want to briefly mention intellectual and developmental disabilities, which can be abbreviated IDD. What falls into that category is usually Down syndrome, fetal alcohol syndrome, some forms of autism, and a lot of other things, but mainly they may be in conjunction with some physical disabilities, but we're typically talking about cognitive impairments when we talk about IDD. And this is where I want to circle back to not setting the bar too low. What I sometimes see in adaptive programming is like, let's just get these kids on a trike, and not doing a lot of inquiry into whether or not it's reasonable to teach those kids to ride a typical two-wheeled bike. And so that's where I just want to just throw that out there. Just because someone is labeled as having IDD, that's not necessarily a reason to put them on the trike. They might end up on a trike, but people with IDD can and do learn to ride a two-wheeled bike, and that can be really powerful for them. Sean and I went and volunteered at Bike First, which is a local summer bike camp, with the goal of teaching kids with intellectual disabilities, usually they have Down syndrome, to ride a typical two-wheel bike through the course of the week. And a lot of the kids who went through the camp and learned come back as volunteers and even as instructors over the years as they age into adulthood. And so it was like a really wonderful thing to see. One of the family who started the camp, actually, their son Cody is now like an instructor there, and he is not able to drive a car as an adult, but he does have a job. He rides his bike everywhere, and he also puts his bike often on the city bus and uses that to get around the city. And so I just thought that was and that's something that you couldn't do if you were on a trike. Trikes are big and heavy and they're hard to transport and get around, but having a typical two-wheel bike and having that skill set really opened up Cody's world and allowed him to fully function as an adult. So just something to think about. But think about your time and resources too. Like if you have 2 days with your kiddos and they don't know how to ride a bike, yeah, maybe do get them on a trike just so they can get the wind in their hair. But if you do have a little more time to spend with them, it might be worthwhile to attempt teaching them to ride a two-wheel bike. One of the therapists we work with said there's kind of 2 questions you can go to figure out if that is a reasonable goal to set. And that is, can they kick a soccer ball, right? Most families will know if their kid is able to kick a soccer ball. That requires balance and strength, standing on one foot. If they can do that, that's a good indication that they could also learn to ride a two-wheeled bike. Can they protect their head in a fall? Families with kiddos with IDDs may have seen them lose their balance and fall, and they may or may not have the reflexes to catch themselves or to cover and protect their head in a fall. If they're able to do that, then I would assume it's safe for them to attempt riding a two-wheeled bike as well. But if they have fallen a lot and have not had good reflexes to catch themselves, that's another reason to maybe consider putting that rider on a tricycle instead. And so these 2 questions and some others are included in a questionnaire that is part of the guide. At the end, there's a whole form you can send home really with your whole class if you want to ahead of time, and gather information about your students to determine where they're at and how you can serve them in your bicycle education. Okay. Just some basic adaptive strategies for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities. This is again getting to know your students. What do they like? What do they need? What motivates them? Utilize modeling and social stories. So you might need to show a lot of pictures. You might need to demonstrate over and over again. It's really helpful for kids to see others riding bikes and see their peers modeling what we're trying to learn. You might need to include more time for each step and really break down each step into smaller steps. So not just get on your bike, but you might really need to break that down into put your hands on the handlebars, swing one leg over the bicycle, really break it down. Include frequent breaks. These students could become overwhelmed, and make sure, let's take a break, get some water, use some calming strategies, and then hopefully get them back into the instruction. Use frequent, immediate positive reinforcement. So if you're trying to get a student to put their helmet on, for example, and you're having a hard time with that, even just getting close to them, having them touch the helmet. Okay, that was a challenge. Let's immediately reward that or give a high five or whatever is meaningful for that student. And then like we do with any kid or even adults, use the balance method for learning to ride. So we tend to stay away from training wheels and say, just take the pedals off, use a strider bike or balance bike or a regular bike with no pedals and let them just get used to balancing first. Okay. Amputations and limb differences. So I know this can be a million different things. Here's just a couple quick strategies. This can include no or limited mobility of a limb. This could include amputations. They may or may not use a prosthetic. And this can also include variations in limb length. For example, one leg is longer than the other. Some adaptive strategies. It could be a typical two-wheeled bike that just has some modifications. That photo up at the top right is a double barrel brake lever. So in that case, we took both brakes and connected them to one brake lever for a rider who could use their right hand to operate the brake lever, but they didn't have mobility in their left. So in this case, they were still able to use both brakes with a pretty simple modification and able to use one hand. The photo below is from my friend Rudy. His right arm is disabled, and he actually contributed to writing the guide as well, and gave us some pointers on how to modify bikes to make them work for amputees and those with limb differences. He's wearing a brace there that helps him keep his hand firm, and then he wrapped some Velcro around his grip, and so it just keeps his hand on the handlebar with Velcro against the glove. And that allowed him to keep both hands on the handlebars, which allowed him to balance and ride even with mobility of just one arm. So that was kind of a cool and like $15 modification that allows him to ride his bike still. So we can modify bikes, but often folks with limb differences, especially if you're talking a kiddo and riding a bike is new to them, the best option might be to get them on a tricycle, which is going to be very stable, or to get them on a tandem. And so they can still ride, but an instructor is the one like steering and keeping the bike upright. Next slide. For students who are deaf, hard of hearing, or hearing impaired, they may or may not use a have a cochlear implant, in which case you just want to get a helmet that's bigger, like too big for them, and pad it on one side. So just put a little more padding, and then they can wear a regular helmet to accommodate their cochlear implant. You might want to learn some basic ASL signs. That's going to make the students feel really welcome. There is a resource also linked in this guide. Lifeprint.com is a good free one for that. And you can just type in like, left turn, and it'll give you the ASL in also a video and visual term, how to use those. So that's really great. You should be doing this anyway, but lots of visual aids, lots of physical demonstrations. All of your students will benefit from that, not just your deaf and hard of hearing students. And then if you're doing any kind of group ride and you have hearing impaired students, I would position them in the middle of the group so that they can use their peers and see what they're doing in terms of stopping and turning, and they don't have to rely so much on verbal cues when riding in a group. A tandem with the instructor who can hear might also be a good option for the student, but there's no reason a hearing impaired student couldn't ride a typical two-wheeled bike. Especially with a group on their own might be, out in traffic might be a different story. But next sprint. If you have students who are blind or visually impaired, down there and in the photo is a Wheatley kit, which was recommended by a number of instructors. It's just this kit of like different shapes, tactile shapes that you can place, and you can you use this to build a visual representation to explain things to someone who's vision impaired. I thought this would be super helpful for building your like bike drills. If you wanted a student who can't see to be able to understand like a map of where we're riding our bike, for example, they could use this tactily. It's almost like a braille map of what you're explaining. So it's a great way to do like an on the fly, it's not technically braille, but a tactile map for someone who can't see. If you have students that can see a little bit, just ask them like but they're still visually impaired, you can ask them, can you see this? What can you see? Do you want me to describe this to you? I would remove, if they're riding, I would remove anything that's unnecessary from where they're riding. And make sure that you're boosting things that are necessary. So like if you have a small cone there, just get a bigger cone and make it super bright. Make sure it's very easy to see for folks with limited vision. You mentioned the tactile mapping. You'll also want to let those students explore any equipment tactily and describe it to them. So let them feel the helmet, feel the straps before they put it on their head, get a sense of what it is. Same with the bike, let them squeeze the brakes. Make sure you point out anywhere that might be greasy or sharp or dangerous on the bicycle, let them know where that is. And again, giving them lots of verbal instructions. A tandem would be a great option if you have a vision impaired student for them to ride with an instructor. Next. If you have students who are paralyzed or have some form of paralysis or spinal cord injury, their bodies can get their nervous systems can get over stimulated and overheated. So just make sure you're building in lots of breaks anytime there's exercise. A trike would be a good option depending on how much mobility they have. But you want to make sure you're getting the right size, and you want to make sure that you have the support that's needed. So some students might need a chest harness or some chest support. Some might even need head support. Some might need their feet strapped onto pedals. So again, just learning more about your student and their specific needs. The trikes that we have at Cycle Oregon have a variety of accessories that can come on and off the trike. So if you just tell us like, hey, the student has like limited mobility in their legs and they're probably going to want their feet strapped to the pedals and they're probably going to need a chest harness, like we can set it up that way for them. This is really dependent on your organization and school rules. But if you're planning to transfer a student from a wheelchair or another mobility device into a trike, just keep in mind you need to work with the families, work with the teachers, and make sure you're respecting that student's boundaries. That can be a really scary thing for them to leave their chair, and they may not want to. But just present that as an option and make sure they're included in that decision. A wheelchair transfer would be a lot easier if you select a trike that is like a similar height to what they're already sitting, so they don't have to go way down or way up to get on a saddle. And so like a recumbent could be a good option, but just check with their school again, the family, and see if that's even possible. Some of your kiddos who use a wheelchair might already have an adaptive trike at home, and even if they have super limited mobility with their legs, it is really helpful for them to just get spinning, get some blood flow. That's a really important part of your therapy when your legs are not mobile. Okay, next. Yeah, so that's kind of like the basic overview. And then I'm going to turn it over to Sean to go through the specific equipment that we added to our fleet and share how it might be used and who it's for.
All right, thanks, Becky. Yeah, I agree with the experience of the box bike. I ride a BoxFeets as well, and it's like you get to some places, even on, like, for example, the Fannel Creek Trail. About 5 years ago, there were a set of chicanes on the Fannel Creek Trail that you actually had to maneuver your bike through this gate to be able to continue on to the trail. And I complained to THPRD, and they took them out. They just put a single bollard there, so now more people can access the trail. You know, so it's something to think about. If you see something like that, you got to say something, right? And we'll get it handled. Speaking of handles, we have this seat post handle at the top, and so this handle can be attached to the seat post of any bike. We used these last year? Becky and I use these often with Bike First, and it worked out great. If there are kiddos that are just learning to balance or maybe needed a little guidance, you can either hold the handle securely, or you kind of let the handle float between your hands like this, and you're kind of running behind them, and the handle can go back and forth and tap your hands and give them a little bit of guidance, but you don't need to actually hold it the whole time if you don't want to, you know, so there's a little bit of option there. But it was really cool. Yeah, it worked out well. The next two items are some medium wide and extra wide saddles. A little more cushion for the bigger bodies. Yep, definitely. You have to have a comfortable saddle is very important when you want to ride bikes. I think we all know that, especially those that want to ride as a commuter. You know, you want to have a really comfortable saddle. The next item is a First Ride harness. Now, I haven't actually used this. We have them, but I've never actually used it on a kiddo. But kind of wraps around their shoulders, and it gives you a handle at the back that there's like a webbing that you can grab onto and kind of hold them steady. And it kind of acts like the seat post handle, but it's actually on their body instead of being part of the bike. All right, next slide, please. Becky covered this double barrel brake lever. So you can modify, you take the two levers off. So you normally have a left and a right lever, and you can have just a single lever that'll operate both brakes. And this is awesome, like it says here, for differences or limited arm and hand mobility. We had a kiddo that we did a little bit of training with in Beaverton that they came from Palestine, and they were missing an arm. And it was difficult for them to operate the brakes, right? So we gave them a bike, we gave them a double barrel brake lever, and it got installed, and that really helped out a lot. So the next item, Bold helmets. These are awesome helmets. They can be used for Sikh kiddos to accommodate their hairstyle, but not only Sikh. I mean, a lot of people have different hairstyles, different cultural hairstyles that are you don't really want them to have to take their hair down, even for a bike training. So have a helmet that can accommodate it is amazing. And these are really cool helmets. We've got a couple of them, and you should definitely look into it if you're getting it for a part of your fleet. And that kind of flows into the extra pads. We talked about that earlier with the cochlear implant, but just having extra helmet pads to accommodate anything that you can position them and add more padding to this side or that side, or onto the top, really helps out a lot. The next item is one of our bikes. So like Becky said, we just got these bikes in the last year, and I don't have a ton of experience with them because they're here. We assembled them. They're in the warehouse. They might have gone out once or twice, but we really need to get them in the field. So if you can help us get them in the field, it'd be awesome. So our first one here is this Freedom Concepts Defier hand cycle, and you can see in the blue there it shows a weight limit of 225, and it's for ages 10 and up. It's a recumbent hand cycle. It can be set up for foot power on request. Yeah, and it makes it easier to transfer from the wheelchair because of the low seat height. Next slide, please. This one's pretty amazing. This thing is large. It's a big bike, but it's really cool. So this is a Freedom Concepts tandem trike. And like, again, we were talking earlier, the stoker or the passenger is in the front on this bike, which is really cool. And your captain's in the back. This one can actually disconnect the chain drive of the passenger at a flip of a lever, so they can or can't pedal, and it's up to them. They don't need to. So this is a really cool bike. Weight limit 400 pounds. I believe that's both riders, and ages 7 up. Yeah. The Gecko recumbent trike. This thing's pretty cool. This one actually went out recently, and 220-pound limit for ages 8 and up. A lot of people need a different riding position, right? And things are uncomfortable on a regular bike, and being able to lean back and sit down is a lot more comfortable for some folks. So this is awesome, like it says here, for balance disorders or neuromuscular disease. Next bike is the Amtrike AM12. It's a hand cycle. This is hand only cranking. You can see at the top there. This is for small riders, ages 4 to 8. We have a really nice setup for the trunk and hand foot support accessories. And you can see that there's a wooden platform at the base there that you can rest your feet on. And it also has the handle in the back that the assistant can kind of guide them with. Staying with the trikes. Oh, I'll go one more back, sorry. This Amtrike Pro Series at the bottom, the 1412. It's another adaptive tricycle. 150-pound limit, 48 is the age range, same as the one above. But you can see that the one on the bottom has foot pedals, and it also has a really awesome seat that has a lot of different trunk and hand foot supports, and another handle at the back that allows the spotter to guide from behind. Okay, next slide. The Woom 1. This is our tiny 12-inch balance bike. This thing has tiny little tires, and I wish you could see it in size comparison to like an adult bike, but it's super tiny and super cute. The smallest balance bike available. Yeah. So this is even smaller than our fleet of balance bikes. This is a tiny one. It's really cool though, and it's great for all kinds of kiddos to get used to. One thing we really like about the Woom balance bikes is that they have a handbrake, and you can see it there. So we can get the kiddos to thinking about operating a handbrake early on and not having coaster brakes. Next bike up is that Riften medium trike. Weight limit 250 pounds, ages 6 to 10. This one is kind of a recumbent. You can kind of see it's got a little bit of a recumbent lean to the back. I really like the handlebars on this one. You can see that's kind of a loop, so it gives you a lot of different hand positions where they can grip anywhere around there, and a lot of adjustment in that seat. The Bike Friday Tandem, you saw a picture of that earlier. My daughter and I were on that, and it recently went into Golden Pliers Bike Shop to get some different handlebars put on that were a little more comfortable. You can see it's got dropper bars in the picture here, and now it's got flat bars, so it brings the riding position a little more upright and more comfortable for some of the kiddos. 400-pound limit. Stoker is 9 and up. It's a really cool bike, yeah, and it's got a low top tube, and this one actually folds for transport, which is really neat. Next slide. The Yuba Mundo. This is like a mid-tail or long tail, we call it. So it's got a 550-pound limit. You can see on the rear, there's a seat, kind of like on the rear rack, and then another set of grips that are coming off the back of the seat. You can have a kiddo on there. There's no seat belt. There's no way to secure someone on this, so they have to be able to hold themselves upright on the back of this. But it's a great option for someone that may not be able to pedal their own bike or be on their own bike. Freedom Concepts trike. So we have a lot of trikes, you can see, but you have to have different sizes for all the different kiddos that we have. So this is ages 7 to 14, 150-pound limit. So we're just going from small trikes to larger trikes to accommodate all the different size bodies that we have out there. And the last one there is the Freedom Concepts AS2000 with the 225-pound weight limit, ages 10 and up. Again, just super adjustable. You can see the different handlebar options on the top there. It kind of flips and rotates, so you can and really adjust that handlebar and that stem. But I think that's it. Is there another slide? Nope, that's it. So yeah, that's our adaptive bike fleet. And like I say, they're here, they're in the warehouse. Let's get our kiddos identified that would like to use these, and let's get them out in the field. Thanks.
So all of these resources are also in the actual guide, but some folks were asking where to find that. On the Oregon Safe Routes website, if you go to lesson plans, you can download the full guide that we shared here today. In the guide itself, there are some of the links that you see below to learn about Hayes principles, American Sign Language. There's a guide linked there for cycling for amputees. There's some cochlear implant helmet wearing resources, and then my email and Sean's email are down there below. To request some of the equipment or to ask questions about adaptive programming or anything you need Jumpstart wise, you can let us know.
With our last a little over 5 minutes here, does anyone have any other questions for Sean and Becky while we have them here about anything they've presented? And I guess if not, Becky, do you want to talk a little bit about the guide and like what sorts of things people can expect in there, kind of as to what Nora's question was before she left?
Yeah, I guess the overview that I gave is like those are like the highlights from how the guide is written. So there's like a little more detail in there than I went into, but That's just kind of a starting place on where to meet those the needs of students with disabilities. And then the second section of the guide is more like actually goes through the Jumpstart lessons and provides some more tips in there for like how to modify those drills based on your student needs. There's a whole section on like helmet fitting, for example, which we didn't dive super into too deeply, but like if you're fitting helmets and you're running into all these things or these different needs, like here are some solutions. So yeah. Also, I should say, like, we have not served because we're often oversubscribed, and our main goal is to serve the entire state and reach a lot of rural areas with the Jumpstart program. We typically don't serve PBS schools with a Jumpstart fleet, and we try to get outside the city to use those. That said, we haven't had a lot of requests for the adaptive gear yet. I still do want to prioritize those rural areas of Oregon when that equipment's being requested. But if you are in Portland Public, Megan mentioned they had borrowed some of our trikes last spring as soon as we got them for a program in Park Rose. So just ask us. It might be no, but as long as we've got that equipment sitting around, we want it to get used. So yeah.
If anybody's doing programming in PPS, they have their own adaptive bikes that's managed by their adaptive PE program. But Park Rose, where I was doing some programming last spring, did not. And so we borrowed some from you guys and rented some from Adaptive Bike Town.
Megan, do you mind taking just a quick minute to kind of talk a little bit about what that was like using those trikes with the out at Park Rose?
Yeah, so those were students who were they're in what's called the life skills class at the school, which is a self-contained classroom for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, but they attend PE with like general ed students. So it was like a mixed ability class with students who don't have like documented disabilities alongside like maybe 8 students from the life skills class. And they came with paraeducators, and some of the students from the life skills class used the standard 2-wheel bikes and did the same drills as their like gen ed peers. And other students were having like a more experiential time riding the trikes. And with most of the kids, we like first introduced them to a 2-wheeled bike and was like, this is for you to try. Like, let's see what your comfort level is with it. And students who like that was not a good fit for them or they weren't comfortable with it then rode a trike instead. And there were a few kids who we knew coming in that the teacher had identified like this student is only going to be on a trike. And so those kids we directed right to a trike.
Awesome.
Does that kind of answer what you were asking, or did
Yeah.
you have other questions about that experience?
Yeah, I was just looking for a little story about it. Yeah, no,
But the kids were super excited about it. Some of the kids, it was their 3rd year doing it because we've had the program 3 years in a row at that middle school now. And the gen ed students who come, it's only 6th grade, but life skills is a mixed grade classroom. So we had like some 8th graders coming back this year who I'd worked with like 2 previous springs, and they were like, it's bike time. And they were really stoked about it. So it's fun to get to see those kids come in and like be back on the bikes, which they remembered fondly and we're looking forward to.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. That's what makes me so excited about all this stuff that Becky and Shauna shared. I'm so excited that Jumpstart has these resources that we can start integrating into the bike ed across the state. It's super cool. Okay, well, just to wrap us up here really quick, I just wanted to have some statewide announcements. We have the fall quarterly meeting coming up on September 16th. That's going to be out in Hillsboro. We have an equity training coming up on the 9th of September. It's going to be a 3-hour training talking about how to support all families in safe routes. We have more information about that up on the website, and you can register there. There's the Safe Routes Partnership is having their Safe Routes to School Summit October 28th through 30th, and that is a virtual session. We also have our fall incentive ordering open for all fall walk and roll. So I will be sending out links to all of these things, as well as links to the adaptive guide and a copy of these slides for everyone to look over after the fact. And thank you all for being here. If you have any questions, feel free to email us at info@Oregon Safe Routes. Or Becky and Sean's email are included in the slides that I'll be sending out if you have more direct questions for them at Jumpstart. But thank you so much to Becky and Sean for sharing all of the hard work they've been working on over the last however many months. And thank you all for being here to talk about it with us. So we will see you next month for our next webinar. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day. We'll see you next time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.